Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Bourbon. My name is Steve Akley. We have a fun event tonight. We have our flagship whiskey, which is our signature virtual bourbon event. This is the thing that we started doing right after the pandemic started, and it really caught fire and probably gave us a lot of the momentum that carried us through with putting on these sort of events. And this is the 25th time that we're doing this. It's a little bit special, though, and I've got kind of someone who's going to serve a little bit as a co-host tonight. And the guy who kind of put all this together, he's saying it wasn't his idea originally, but whether that's the case or not, he ran with the concept. And that's going to be Lenny Eckstein from Deerhammer. Lenny, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Steve. Thanks for opening up the opportunity. And most of you guys know I'm definitely an American single malt super fan first, and a single malt distiller second. So I was pretty stoked with the opportunity to pull together some of my favorites.
Yeah,
across
Lenny did the whole thing. You came up with all the distilleries that should be on. You contacted them. I was like, I can give you help. You can just tell me what to do, and I'll reach out to everybody. And no, Lenny did it all. So I got to sit back and basically take a vacation and let Lenny run things. And I think he did an excellent job of curating some great distilleries. So I'm excited about what we're going to be trying both this week and next week as well. So pretty cool stuff, Lenny. So appreciate it, man. Yeah. And next week you'll actually be one of the participants. People are going to be trying your whiskey next week. So if they're wondering, hey, this guy's making single malts, why don't I get to try it next week? So that you'll be on that event, correct?
Yeah, I'll be on that, correct. And for whatever it's worth, I'm leaving tomorrow for a motorcycle road trip through Canada. I think I'm going to be in Canmore the evening of that event. So I don't know, something happens.
How's their internet up there in Canmore?
I have no idea. I hear they have internet. But worst case scenario, I'll have one of my distillers sit in for me, but I expect to be there. So.
Okay, sounds good. We'll have you stick around too if you want to, put in any questions. Your area of expertise, certainly in this area, is far greater than mine. So feel free to interject any questions at any time throughout the course of our interviews. Before we kind of get into, we will profile our 4 different distilleries independently. We will also go through and do a tasting of their flagship whiskey. And as we do that, we like to lean on you guys to provide nosing and tasting notes. So we'll kick it off. We'll nose that thing. Talk about, share it in the chat function. If you could leave your Zoom on mute, that's fine. Use the chat, and then we'll do the same thing with the tasting notes. At the end, you'll get an opportunity to open up your mic and ask questions and things like that. So we do save some time at the end. Again, before we get rolling, though, we do like to introduce all of our distillers. So a great opportunity to meet everybody up front, and then once we just do say a quick hello to all of them, we will start with our first interview, and we'll follow the order that I'm going to be going here right now as I introduce them individually. So up first is going to be Owen Martin, the head distiller of Stranahan's out of Denver, Colorado. Owen, how you doing, man?
Doing well.
Doing well. Despite the no air conditioning, your things are okay, right?
Found the one air conditioned room in the distillery and hid in it.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing. So looking forward to talking to you. Obviously, you guys certainly well respected, very excited to have you here, learn a little bit more about the things that you guys got going on, and then of course tasting your offering for tonight. So we'll talk to you in a few. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is Colin Keegan, the founder of Santa Fe Spirits out of course, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Colin, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking, Steve. Now, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well as well. So things are good. And you happen to be in one of my favorite cities in the United States. I love Santa Fe, New Mexico. Really great place. Beautiful. I love the architecture there. The food is great. So yeah, just a great place to visit for sure. So
smashing. Yeah. It's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, we'll talk to you in a few minutes too. All right.
Smashing.
All right. Next up is Mark Vierthaler out of the head distiller out of Whiskey Delbach out of Tucson, Arizona. Mark, how are you doing?
I am doing outstanding. How's everyone today?
Yeah. I think they're good. And how did I do in the last thing? Was that good?
Perfect. That was right on the money.
Yeah. Well, I cheated. I watched a YouTube video beforehand. I was like, I don't want to say this wrong, so I watched a YouTube video you were in. So yeah. And I have it spelled out phonetically here, but that's behind the scenes stuff. So I don't need to share that, I guess. But
that's appreciated.
Yeah. All right, buddy. We'll talk to you in a few. Can't wait to learn more about what you got going on. I actually was trying some of your whiskey today. So we had I have this bottle shop and a sales rep came by, and they're your representative in the market. So that was kind of cool. I was like, wait a second, I'm talking to this guy today. So it was
outstanding.
Fun. It was surreal. All right. We'll talk to you in a few. All right. Next up is Jared Himstedt out of Balcones. He's the head distiller there out of Waco, Texas. Jared, how are you doing, man?
Doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. You guys, of course, again, pioneers in your state. So you guys are very cool thing. What an all-star lineup that Lenny put together here. So yeah, very cool. So
happy to be on it. I didn't get the memo that we had to have guitars. Yeah.
Right.
I must have misplaced that email. Next time.
Next time. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon and look forward to it. All right. So first up is going to be the guy we introduced first, of course, Owen Martin, the head distiller for Stranahan's out of Denver. Owen, again, how are you tonight, sir?
Hanging out.
Hanging out. Well, we're glad to have you here. And of course, Stranahan's has this great, history when it comes to Colorado whiskey. So if you don't mind, share us a little bit of that history. When did Stranahan's exactly get started and how was the company founded?
Yeah, I got started in 2004, released the first whiskey in 2006. We got founded sort of by, well, like many things, accident, I suppose, but Denver has the beer culture. Lenny's same kind of a foundational beer knowledge and production that then led into whiskey, and ours was directly in that because they literally are piping beer through a hole in the wall and into a still.
Mm-hmm.
So we were originally just sourcing a porter and distilling it. Not me. I was 14 when that happened, but I'm here now anyway. So yeah, and then it's kind of grew from there. Eventually that brewery called Flying Dog moved out of state, and we brought the wash production in-house, moving locations, and we've been in this location since 2010, and just kind of grown since then, making, I think they're at 20 barrels a week and then 40 barrels a week around 2014. We were at 60 even last year, and this year we're up to 70 on the same system that we use. So it's all, the front end was an existing brewery that went out of business. So we make it all on a 30 barrel brew kit, essentially following roughly the same porter recipe. No hops, no carbonation, obviously, but we lauter off the grain. So we're fermenting off the grain, distilling off the grain, double distillation, more in the style of Scotch. But that's one thing I'm sure we'll all talk about today is the many different permutations of American single malt, because you certainly don't have to do any of those things other than be it 100% malted barley. I came on in 2016.
Okay.
So 6/6/16 was my start date, just to get real satanic with it. And I just kind of moved up the ranks here. I guess to go back before that, I made bourbon for a couple years in Arkansas.
Okay.
And before that, I went to school in Scotland to get my master's degree in brewing and distilling science. Having gone there thinking I was getting into beer, and then you live in Scotland for long enough, you get corrupted over to whiskey pretty quick. So that was kind of my path, and it honestly makes it, in a weird way, kind of a not planned path to American single malt, but with a Scottish education and then a bourbon production background, falling into this category is kind of fortuitous. So yeah, I've been kind of the head distiller blender position for the last 3 years, more so overseeing kind of day-to-day production as well as blending our special releases. And in fact, I'm about to dump all our snowflake barrels tomorrow. Okay. And I'll marry those for, I was hoping I'd do it back in June to get a 6-month marriage of all the casks before releasing it in December, but life gets in the way sometimes. Right. So we'll get a few months to marry everything and get that out in December, hopefully. So, but today we got our black label, which we kind of just, we relaunched that in the spring. So this was kind of the end of our lineup revamp that we started just about 2 years ago. So we started that by introducing Blue Peak, which was kind of our more entry level, a little lower proof, a little lower price point. And when we did that, we then upped the ages and kind of complexity across our entire range. So, from 2006 onwards, we've been releasing 2-year-old whiskey. Pretty quick, that became a blend of 2 to 5-year-old whiskey of our own. I say blend in like the small B sense, like not a blended whiskey, but blend as right. The bourbon.
Yeah.
So, we'd been doing 2 to 5-year-old whiskey for 12, 14 years. And so when we released the blue label, then we upped our yellow label to a 4 to 7-year-old blend. And then that finally, we changed this black label, which had been a 4-year-old whiskey, to this now being an 8-year-old whiskey. The fun thing about this one is that it's 4 years in new char, and then it spends 4 more years in ex-Irish whiskey barrels. So as far as an 8-year-old American profile, it's going to be much lighter than what you might expect, thinking 8-year-old bourbon 8-year-old rye, something like that. But because the last 4 years of this whiskey's maturation were in barrels that were not really imparting much oak at all, it's more about the oxidating and resting. I think it comes across with a really nice, light, fruity, and somewhat floral profile.
Mm-hmm. Before we get to the tasting, because you brought up Snowflake, how long have you guys been doing that? When did that tradition start at Stranahan's?
So we are going to be releasing our 25th Snowflake this year.
Wow.
I believe. I can't off the top of my head think about the year it started, but how that worked is it originally was a single barrel like wine cask release, and I think they released 3 of them at once.
Okay.
And then that became a twice a year event. So we did a summer Snowflake and a winter Snowflake. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to have a summer one, and then kind of want to double down and make it more special. So actually a month after I started was the first year we didn't do a summer Snowflake, and we instead replaced it with an event called Cask Thief, which is kind of the opposite of Snowflake. So Snowflake's about blending all these crazy cask finishes together into something that's more than the sum of its parts. Cask Thief was the opposite in that it was a showcase of about 5 to 6 single barrels that all had either maybe a different fermentation or a different grain bill, different specialty malt, for example, or all these different finishes. We've done gin, we've done mezcal, we've done maple syrup. So really it's just kind of a party, a block party that we put on. And now we just do Snowflake once a year. So this year being the 25th release, even though it's not the 25th year of doing Snowflake, obviously.
Right. All right. As we get ready to taste your signature whiskey here, the one you told us a little bit about, what do you think we should expect? What should we expect as we start nosing this thing and start sharing some notes? If you haven't done so already, folks, go ahead and give that a pour, and then let's start nosing this thing.
Yeah. So again, kind of a lighter oak profile than what you might expect. That 4-year mark for us is one that we really like to play around with. That's the one we've decided to release the blue label at. That's the one that makes kind of the base of the yellow label. Because we still 99% of what we make is still in new charred barrels. We're starting to kind of experiment with more ex Stranahan's second fill barrels, but that's still a program that's in its infancy. 4 years to me and to us is a really nice balance between the amount of oak while still maintaining that malt character and making sure that we don't overwhelm that and lose, all the extra work we put in to make a single malt instead of a bourbon.
Yeah.
Double distillations, 5 to 7 day fermentations. We could be doing 2-day fermentations. We could be doing, a big column still run straight from the grain to the distillate, but we don't. And so to just have the oak overwhelm it would be a huge waste of time and effort in my eyes. So 4 years is one of those marks that I do, not necessarily that I'll bottle it at, but it's, in the case of the blue label, yes, but it's when I start to play around with things. So if there's a lot of 4-year-old barrels that I like, in this case, I moved them all over I actually hand filled these Bushmills barrels myself, which is kind of cool and a personal touch to that because I was still a floor monkey at that point. This one's pretty close to my heart in that we were nosing and filling and deciding which barrels to go into them back in 2017. And then to be able to blend the final release years later is pretty cool to me.
Yeah. The notes that you're seeing coming in are just spot on with kind of what I'm getting here. It's just very fruity on the nose, which is very interesting. And you're hitting a lot of that. You got green apples, Bartlett pears, fruit cocktail syrup, cherry, grassy notes in there.
Yeah.
Honey.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah,
so
apple.
I think our normal release skews a little more kind of like roast from the roast malts and the barrel character playing with each other. But this one with the 4 years in the Irish barrel has taken on kind of that lighter Irish whiskey profile. I mean, I think it still very much has our profile at its heart. But yes, like you just said, like a lot of those lighter ester characters, more so than our standard releases, while still kind of getting that butterscotch and a little bit of like maybe the coffee character that is more of our hallmark. I think it kind of has that as its core while being surrounded by this sort of like perfumey character.
Yeah. Honey drizzled melon pear. I like this from Jason Sauter. Fresh split wood after the rain. If you're thinking before the rain, forget it. It's after the rain, clearly.
Hey, I'll take it.
Candy apple with a berry, applets and cutlets. I'll have to look that up later to get caught up. Honeydew melon. Mashed pecans and honey. All right. A lot of great notes there. I think this is exciting. Certainly, layers of flavors, coming through on the nose, which is very cool. So let's give this thing a taste and see if it lives up to the great expectations that have been set by an incredible nose. So here we go. Cheers, gang.
Oh, sorry, I was already ripping it. Those are my tasting notes, not my aromas, but whatever, same idea.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Boy, that's fantastic. It's nice finish there, a little spicy. You get that fruity taste though, kind of almost a fruit cocktail of different fruits in there. You get some of that honey on there too. And I like what you got going on here, Owen. Good stuff, man.
Yeah, I think it's weird because it is the oldest release of our core lineup, but it's actually got one of the brightest profiles, I guess you could say. I think our standard releases do skew a little more in the oak territory or heavier oak territory, but I think where we get a lot of times we hear like coffee, dried apricot, banana for our standard yellow label releases. I think this one does kind of have brighter berry characteristics and floral characteristics that I think the Irish whiskey and again the extended oxidation time has kind of lended it.
Yeah. Oh, and our podcasts and things like that are bourbon geared. So, for many, the people that follow what we do, they're bourbon fans first and foremost. So sometimes just even saying single malt is kind of off-putting. They think of, they right away, they think of peaty or smoky scotches and they're like, this is what it's going to be. This is, you're bringing something that's totally different than that is, as sweet as any bourbon that we like out there. It's got a great finish. It's got those peppery notes that we like too when we're having maybe a nice rye whiskey or something like that. This is really good stuff, my friend.
Yeah, I think, well, first, thank you. But yeah, my elevator pitch whenever they trot me out to talk to people is normally like if you put bourbon on one point and single malt scotch, like a Highland scotch on another, and drew a line between the two, most of our releases are going to fall somewhere along that line. And I think that's true, not as a blanket statement, but if you're going to make a generalization of American single malt, that's probably true for a lot of them. I usually argue that if beyond those two categories, that craft beer, as I spoke to, is kind of our third big influence there with the use of specialty malt, the use of a brewer's yeast that has a longer fermentation and creates some of those brighter fruit characters we've been talking about. So I think between those three, we've kind of been able to pick and choose what we like out of each one, and then make what our whiskeys are.
Yeah.
So I think that's the fun part of American single malt, is being able to tread, kind of, it's uncharted. We're just kind of making it how we want to make it, and we don't have to make it to style, to profile, because those don't exist. Like, it hasn't existed. We didn't even call our whiskey an American single malt till 4 or 5 years ago. We had always branded ourselves as a Rocky Mountain whiskey because the American single malt movement hadn't even begun, or had just begun. So yeah, it's been fun to kind of help drive it along with the other people in this tasting.
Yeah, very good stuff. And we appreciate you bringing it to us. And do you have time to stick around? Because we'll open it up for questions from everybody at the end, if that's okay.
Q&A is my bread and butter, buddy.
All right. Sounds good. We'll talk to you in just a little bit here. All right. Next up, we're going to be talking to Colin Keegan, the founder of Santa Fe Spirits out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Colin, how are you, sir? Or did we lose him? He said he was having the storm issues? I don't see him. We might have lost him. All right. Well, wait a minute. There he is. Here comes Colin. He's coming back. Maybe he was sheltering. Maybe the storm had him worried he was sheltering. You're okay, Colin?
Yeah, I was fine. I don't think my wife knew I was on a phone call. She's yelling, "Oh, the cat's floating away." But it's okay.
Okay. So
she was
Colin,
messing around, and I said I had to run down, and I'm in upstairs in the bedroom.
Okay. Colin, tell us a little bit about yourself. I think I detect a Texas accent there, correct?
Texas drawl, y'all. No, not quite. Jared can attest I'm not from Texas.
Okay.
But Northern England is
Northern
what the
England,
Philly accent is. But funnily enough, lived in Santa Fe for coming up for my 30th year here.
Oh, nice.
So you lived in Santa Fe longer than anywhere else, actually, in my life. But was an architect, and for, gosh, about 18 years here. Designed a house in an apple orchard here in Tucscon, where we still live, just outside Santa Fe, and invited friends over for apple pickings, and then making hard cider, then making some apple brandy, kind of fun hobby while I was back at architecture.
Mm-hmm.
When the economy tanked in 08, it took till about 09 to get here before nobody needed an architect for their big ass houses on a golf course. So I was out of a job and turned my hobby into a bigger hobby, bought a building, bought a still, and realized I'd been moonshining. So I actually stopped and got a license, as you need to, and stopped all that moonshining nonsense. In putting a business plan together, I realized I really am not much of a brandy drinker, more of a whiskey drinker. So why not make what I like? So we actually, our first products we really made under the license was this Colin Keegan single malt, this one here. Although it had to age, we were playing with it. So that was first released in 2015.
Okay.
We're a bit of a classic craft distillery. We are really working to just do single malts, but we do have vodka, gin, brandy, couple of other different liqueurs and things like that. But this is our love, is single malts and all the variations. Today, we're really tasting our flagship, which is this, we call it the orange label. We've got a bunch of different labels that are different finishes and stuff. But Colin Keegan is a classic American single malt. Luckily for us, the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, of which all the other distillers here were all members and have been, you know, some from the start and some joined in, you know, as we've gone along. We've put sort of guardrails on our category while we're applying for federal delineation of exactly who we are.
Right.
Jared can talk a lot more about that. He's done a lot of work on this. Thank you.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because that's getting closer, I understand. So, and that would be a huge step forward for single malts, right? I mean,
the federal government's had all the paperwork for a few years now.
Okay.
They're getting around to it. It takes a bit of time.
Yeah.
Can't really complain because, you know, federal government takes a long time, especially through pandemics and stuff. So yeah, back to Colin Keegan. It's good to be part of this all-inclusive category because we age our whiskey in new and used oak.
Okay.
It is 100% malted barley, 2-row raw barley. But we age in a third in new oak, medium char, and 2/3 in used oak, just straight out of Kelvin Cooperage, which is where we get our casks from.
Right.
And a third of it, the grain, is mesquite smoked.
Okay.
I don't know if you poured it into your glass yet.
Yeah.
But you'll probably smell a bit of that smoke coming at you straight away.
Yeah, it's already, yep, you can get that there.
So the reason for the new oak is to, even at a third mesquite smoke, it can, you know, sort of take over.
Right.
So we want to keep it in balance. So we put a third of the whiskey in new oak, and that helps temper it to try and keep it more even. As Owen was talking about, it's a double distillation that we do.
Yep.
You know, stripping runs, finishing runs, and
Colin, how did you land on single malts? Why is that the style that you wanted to go with when you're starting your company?
I'd always had a love of single malts. You know, I was only in my mid-20s when I left England. Didn't really think much about them when I was there, but over here in America, I started collecting them. A bit like Lenny, you know, I'm a big single malt fan, and I happen to make it as well, you know, and it just seemed to be a good fit. We also wanted to do something that we looked at the size of the bourbon guys when we were actually putting together a business plan. I thought, oh my goodness, to get to that size will take, as it did with them, decades. And I don't know if I have that in me. So let's start doing something that's a bit different. You know, it's an artisanal product, handmade, as are all the other whiskeys here we're tasting. And it's easier to stand out if you're doing something just a little different. And hence the mesquite smoke, it is made the same as a Scotch style whiskey, Scotch
Uh-huh.
single malt. But we use mesquite in the malting process. Well, I say we. There is mesquite used by Breese Malting House, and they do our malting for us
Okay.
for this. Yeah, that's really about it. We definitely are one of the smaller guys in this group. You know, each batch we do about 4 a year, is about 15 casks, 15 to 20 in a blend. And, you know, it growing each year. It was 3 last year. It's going to be 4 this year, maybe 5 next year, you know. But moving and shaking, and proud to be part of this friendly gang that we're in, you know, American Single Malts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and do you do experiments, different types of single malts? Tell us a little bit about how this works. Because again, most of our knowledge base comes from, you know, distilleries, you know, in the bourbon world. So tell us a little bit about on the single malt side, some of the things you do on that side.
Yeah, really everything we do starts with the same recipe.
Uh-huh.
You know, 100% malted barley, 1/3 smoked, 2/3 unsmoked. Until about 4 years ago, when we started laying down some pure unsmoked.
Right.
I'll let everybody into a bit of a secret. By the end of this year, we will have an unsmoked Colin Keegan, which is actually going to be a big step forward for us. Small run, but we have others behind it. Hopefully it's successful. But the other single malts that we do are really finishing. We do an apple brandy cask finished. So we don't release anything until the 3-year mark in the case of Colin Keegan. We find here we have a different climate, that 3 years is a good benchmark to start pulling casks to blend. We are at 7,000 feet, and that really is the one factor that drives everything. It gives us less humidity and thinner air. I mean, our boiler's scaled about 1.5 times what it needs to be, just because the air's so thin, it needs to be bigger. And so after 3 years, we're finding those higher volatiles that everybody can talk about ad nauseum are escaping from the cask a bit quicker. So it can help mellow that down. But the other single malts, that we've got a range of 4 currently out at the moment.
Okay.
The regular that we're going to taste today, the flagship, as we call it, apple brandy cask finish. We do a Pedro Jimenez sherry cask finish.
Okay.
2. Being as high and dry as we are, we do need to recharge any casks we get in. So we actually pour a case of Pedro Jimenez sherry and swill it around in the 60-gallon sherry butts before we empty that out and then put the whiskey in. The other one in the lineup, I was going to show you an example. I don't have one here. As I say, I'm in the upstairs bedroom, so don't have all my accoutrements handy.
Right. Yeah.
Or as my wife calls it, that place you go to drink whiskey and talk to your friends, which is about right.
Right. Right. And how do you and Lenny know each other? How does this come about?
Whiskey making, isn't it, Lenny? We met at conferences.
And we're not too far away. I mean, I don't know, maybe 3-hour drive from where I'm at down to Santa Fe. You know, I mentioned I'm leaving on this motorcycle trip tomorrow, but I think Santa Fe Spirits might have been one of my first motor distillery road trips that I had done right as Deerhammer. Well, maybe it wasn't the first, but it was right as we were starting up. So we started roughly the same time. Colin, I think you guys were a little ahead of us. But yeah, you know, just relative neighbors, and always keeping tabs.
I have a great love for the part of the world that Lenny's from. Buena Vista is quite the place to be if you're either a kayaker, river rafter, or mountaineer. I used to climb a lot of the 14ers in Colorado, and distilleries kind of cut into the time to do that, don't they, guys? Yeah. So we don't have much time left for that, but yeah, beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, where Lenny lives, it's one of those places where you go there and you start thinking, how can I make this a place where I come a lot, or you know, have a second home, or just live here full time. It is that neat of a place. It's just quaint, fun. It's just nice.
Y'all can crash on my sofa.
Oh, cheers.
There you go. So as we start tasting this, you can see a lot of nosing notes coming in here. So pair with cigars, campfire in the morning, white chocolate macadamia nut cookies, fresh vanilla bean, smoldering coals, tobacco, barbecue sauce, early fall sunsets. Yeah, that's a great nosing note there. I like that one. Barbecue burnt ends, chamomile, dried oranges, bran flakes. Good call on the bran flakes, says Tim. So,
That's a good. I haven't heard that one before.
yeah, sweet aroma.
I like it.
Smoky sea breeze. Even Gary admitted that sounds weird. Wonderful nose, just a hint of the mesquite smoke, pear, hint of juicy fruit in there. I could see that. There is that sweet component there that you do catch for sure. Apple brandy finish single malt is incredible. Yeah, good. All right, let's try this one and see what we got here on the taste. Let's see. Again, cheers, gang.
Cheers.
Yeah, that's pleasant. It the mesquite, hits you from all the way through the whole thing, but it's not overpowering. It yields to the sweetness while staying there, and creates just a delightful mixture of taste there. So yeah, that's really good. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly the phrase we use. There's definitely smoke on the nose. We describe it. The nose is like an Akley whiskey, but drinks like a Highland. It doesn't quite have that sort of peatiness that clears your sinuses and your eardrums at the same time. I love that, by the way. I'm not knocking it at all. I'm a Ardbeg Oban drinker myself, but I think that the smoke does yield to the sweetness sort of through the palate and helps with a longer finish too.
Yeah. When things go wrong, it doesn't yield and it ends up being overpowering. And this is great. This is really, really nice. So it's like maybe you put an apricot or something on the grill, and it's something like that. It's kind of got the fruity sweetness with the smoke paired there. It's very nice. What else we get in there, gang? As you taste one, I see chocolate, leather, and tobacco. So that's good. Keith before had said, what's he say there? Bit of smoke on the palate, smooth finish. Yep. Very interesting on the finish. Keeps pulling forward to the tip of the tongue. I agree. It definitely kind of stays. The finish kind of sticks around. Right at the tip of the tongue. A little spice going on there. What else?
Yeah. No, I would agree with all the comments. Definitely. It's not a heavy smoke, but it's definitely there, and it sort of helps hold a lot of the other flavors in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit like Lenny's hickory smoked corn, which that happens to be one of Mr. Bill's favorites, so I know he likes that.
Mexican hot chocolate. There you go.
Mexican hot chocolate. That's good. Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, Owen came up with that one. That's good. So there you go. Well. Again, same thing, Colin. Please stick around. We'll have the group do a live Q&A at the end. That's how we like to finish these off. So we'll open it up for questions where folks can actually open up their mics and ask either the group or individual distillers questions. Okay.
I can stay around in good company and drink whiskey. I think I can manage that.
All right. And you got the packet. I hope we sent all of our distillers the samples of everybody else's whiskey, so it just allows you to drink along. And we hate the idea of you guys hearing about these other whiskeys and not being able to try them. So we always send the other whiskeys there. So hopefully you got that. So that'd be good. All right. Next up is going to be Mark Vierthaler of the head distiller at Whiskey Del Bach out of Tucson, Arizona. Mark, how you doing, man?
I am doing outstanding. It is. As Colin said, it is a pleasure to spend an evening in good company talking about things we're passionate about.
Absolutely. So give us a little bit about your background. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, so I am the current head distiller here at Whiskey Del Bach in Tucson. I started distilling about 7 years ago.
Okay.
Actually got my start out in Dodge City, Kansas, which is my hometown, as a director of marketing and distiller at Boot Hill Distilling Company. Boot Hill Distillery. Was there for 3 years, took a head distiller position out in Maryland at 10th Ward Distilling. I was their head distiller for about 3 years and then left Maryland to come out here to the Southwest to take over the reins here at Whiskey Del Bach. Interestingly enough, a lifetime ago, like a lot of us who I think sometimes fall into the industry, I actually was an investigative reporter.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I have a bachelor's of science in journalism. I tended to cover government and crime and law enforcement, things like that. Unfortunately, early 2000s hit. Like a lot of other people who worked in the newspaper industry, decided there wasn't a lot of money for people like us. So moved back to my hometown of Dodge City, took over the newspaper there for a little bit, left there to work in public relations and marketing, still kept some freelance writing, was writing a lot about craft spirits. This was around the time that the cocktail renaissance was really starting to kick off on the coasts. And the company that I ended up being a director of communications for worked in agriculture.
Yeah.
At the same time, was still doing this freelance writing. My wife and I started managing a bar program, again, focused on craft whiskeys, really focusing on handmade stuff. And after about 7-8 years doing the marketing PR thing, these 3 farmers who are starting a distillery in Dodge reached out to me and said, "Hey, we know you know booze, we know you know agriculture. Do you have any interest in coming on board as a consultant?" At the time, I was itching to get out of the job I was at. I just didn't have a whole lot of job satisfaction. Noticed that they were looking for a part-time distiller and a part-time events manager. I called one of the 3 owners that I knew, said, "Hey, how about you bring me on full-time as your director of communications and as a distiller?" They said yes. So, yeah, so very circuitous coming back around.
How did you learn the craft then? So since you didn't come from that background, how do you learn how to distill?
I was lucky enough that I'd been doing enough freelance writing for a while that, I knew intellectually the process that it took for distilling. But as I always tell people getting into the industry, knowing it intellectually and in practice.
That's what I feel like I would be. I mean, I could talk a good game and act like I know. And then you put me in there and be like, here's the raw ingredients, go, Steve. I wouldn't know what I'm doing. I got to admit, I wouldn't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's 2 very different games. So I was lucky enough that the 3 farmers that founded this distillery were willing to take the time. Kind of their thought was they wanted to take grain that they were growing to vertically integrate it, not just sell it for feed, not just sell it as a commodity, but make whiskey, make vodka, make gin. And so when I came on, I was very upfront with, I've never done this before. I have some very basic fermentation experience. And yeah, it was a learning process with myself, one of the founders, and our director of operations. Just kind of the 3 of us making the mistakes, screwing things up time after time. I always tell people, you have to understand it was 6 months before we felt comfortable to release a product, that we were distilling stuff and we're just basically saying, would we buy this? No. Well, then we can't sell this.
Well, that's very, very fair and honest there. So we appreciate that. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the company too. So Whiskey Del Bach, and the brand and how long it's been around, that type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So Whiskey Del Bach, last year we actually just celebrated our 10-year anniversary.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's a huge milestone.
Heck yeah, it is.
We were started basically as a passion project by our co-founder, Stephen Paul. So Stephen spent 30 years in Tucson becoming a very well-known carpenter, and he specifically worked with mesquite wood. And, as Colin kind of touched on, mesquite is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Saturated isn't the right word, but saturated within the Southwest. It grows wild. It's used in cooking. It's used in furniture. It's this very gnarled, very striking grain of wood. And so Stephen and his wife Elaine ran this furniture business, making these custom pieces, became very well known internationally. But end of every day, Stephen would sweep up his mesquite shavings, take them home, and they would burn them in a fire pit in their backyard here in Tucson while they would drink single malt scotch, specifically Speysides. That was what they really liked. And Stephen would always joke, well, there goes our profits up in smoke. And one day Elaine got tired of hearing that joke and said, hey, when we think about scotch, we think about drying malt over burning peat. Has anyone ever really thought about doing it with mesquite? And so Stephen, being Stephen, kind of got his talons into this idea and started teaching himself how to malt, and started teaching himself how to smoke malt, and then teaching himself how to distill. And over several years of a lot of starts and failures and tweaks, he finally felt confident to start Whiskey Del Bach. Technically Hamilton Distillers Group, which is our overarching company, but Whiskey Del Bach was inspired by Speyside scotches, and then the idea of being able to mesquite smoke malt like you would with peat. His daughter, Amanda, was in New York, decided to come back, help him start it. So the two of them founded it, again, 10 years ago now. And in that time, we have grown from just being a very small local Tucson focused company to we're in, I want to say 18 states now.
Okay. I know you're in Missouri, so I see your
Yes,
products
yes.
around. So yeah, which is cool. Yeah.
So it was, again, just kind of this idea of how can I hand create something that I would want to drink? And that was the impetus that led to what is now Whiskey Del Bach.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the whiskey that we're going to be drinking tonight. What can we expect as we, and again, if you haven't poured this already, folks, please do so. And we'll start nosing notes as Mark tells us a little bit about it.
Yeah, definitely. So I will admit I'm one of those people that doesn't like to suggest notes because I feel like it's very easy to kind of influence people to what I tend to get out of it. So I definitely encourage you to pop up and give your tasting notes. So again, we are an American single malt, which means we have 4 ingredients. We have malted barley, we have water, we have yeast, and we have the barrel. We tend to take a New World and Old World approach to our production. Like Owen had talked about, like Colin had talked about, we do ferment off grain. So we do it like a traditional Scottish whiskey, which means we lauter, which means the fermentation and distillation is going to be a little bit more floral, a little bit lighter. You're going to let some of those esters come through a little bit more. We only do a double 100% copper pot distillation. Again, stripping run into the spirit run. One of the ways that we do kind of lean into the New World, kind of new American style is we only, well, for a while we only used, but we mostly used New American White Oak, charred. So again, leaning into that kind of bourbon rye style. We have recently started using some second use and some third use as well to get a little more nuance and flavor. But because we're in Tucson, where on an average day, we're having anywhere from 30 to 40 degree swings in temperature, we actually age in quarter casks, which are 15 gallons.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we make very, very narrow cuts. So when you can age in a 53-gallon barrel, you know, you can let some of those more funky notes in the new make oxidize, change. With us, because we're going into 15-gallon barrels, we're getting a lot of push and pull in a very short amount of time. We don't want to run that risk of over extraction. So we make super narrow cuts. We proof down to 110, go into 15-gallon new American White Oak barrels with a medium plus toast and a number 3 char. That then only ages between 10 to 15 months. Once we hit that 10-month mark, we start pulling those barrels and sampling them. Because again, you really run that risk of over extraction. You run that risk of very green, very terpene notes. So narrow cuts, short aging, those then get pulled, blended into typically 500 to 600 gallon batches. And then we do a slow proof down over 2 weeks before it goes into the bottle. Okay. So what we're tasting today is what we call our classic, which again, there is no smoked malt in this. Is again one of our flagship products. Dorado is a mesquite smoked single malt. This one is a 100% unsmoked malt. This again, what you're tasting probably was anywhere from the 12 to 13 month mark. And again, we use reverse osmosis water to proof it down over the period of about 2 weeks. One thing we are also very proud of, we do not chill filter. As the Blonde brothers say, we don't chill filter because we're not monsters. It only goes through a basic paper filter to catch any char that may have been left over after barrel harvest.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So you're getting some great notes here on the nose. So you're talking cedar, creme brulee, white chocolate bark, lavender, heavy butterscotch, apricot field after harvest. That's interesting. Lemon curd, butterscotch, sandalwood, red candy, apple, rice pudding, caramel and oak. Another concur on the rice pudding, brown sugar, spun caramel, almond cookies, likes the lavender and the rice pudding, honey and bread. Man, so there's a lot of things going on there. So that's pretty cool.
one of the things, and these are all very similar notes to what we tend to get. One of the things that's always struck me, especially with the classic, if you pour it and you let it breathe a little bit, it has a very distinctive cola note to it.
Okay.
Like almost like sometimes like a cherry cola, sometimes just like a regular like Coca-Cola or a cola nut. But you get, because you have that additional medium plus toast under that char, you get some more of those sweeter notes being pulled out that you wouldn't get if you didn't have that extra toasting in there.
Yeah. All right, gang. Cheers. Let's try this thing. See what we think. Let's talk tasting notes now. Yeah. Oh boy. Again, lots of surprises going on here tonight. This is really good stuff. This is Lenny. This is doing what you wanted to do to introduce some different things, right?
Yeah, and just to chime in a little bit on this for everyone here, the distillers, but everyone in general. For me, I really wanted, first and foremost, I wanted to pick from distilleries that were exceptionally creative, offerings I might be a fan of or curious about. But also, I really tried to pick regional differences. And while tonight's tasting is kind of heavy on, the Rockies and Southwest and a little bit of Texas. I think that's a big deal. We're not always tasting that in bourbon, where obviously is bourbon being made all over the country, but American single malt, I think it benefits from not having a home base other than this country.
Yeah. Yeah. This is delightful for sure.
Earl Grey tea. I like that tasting note. That's really nice.
Yeah. You get those fruity notes they're talking about, honey grams, almost kind of a taste of like a little beer too. I'm getting like a beer note, which is wild. Peanut brittle, Heath bar, candied cashew, honey on biscuits, honey graham crackers, honey and stone fruit, graham crackers, Earl Grey tea, graham cracker, pastries, and spice, cream soda. There's your soda, cardamom pods, pastries with spice, also tasting clove. Yeah, there's a lot going on there, man. That's fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we're really pleased with this. This one was cool because the classic was named one of Wine Enthusiast's top 100 spirits of 2021. So like that was obviously, we wouldn't put anything in a bottle we're not proud of, but it's still incredibly humbling and just amazing to see when people like it as much as we do. Kind of to go off of Lenny's comment, kind of what Owen had talked about, one of the cool things also about American single malt is because we aren't as constrained as some other whiskeys, you really do have that opportunity to start playing with different cask finishes, different barley malts, even different yeast strains.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing that we spent a long time doing was dialing in those yeast strains to, is this going to accentuate the flavors that we want, knowing what our constraints are and also what our opportunities are.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, like what you're doing here, and please stick around. We'll have the Q&A session at the end, and I think people will probably have some questions for you. All right.
Sounds
Talk to you a little bit, Mark. Okay. Last but not least is Jared Himstedt, the head distiller for Balcones out of Waco, Texas. Hey, Jared, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good. It's nice when you go last. We're all lubed up.
Right.
Pretty good.
Exactly.
And trying to look around my office, figure out how I could get my feet up,
For sure. So tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about Balcones in just a second.
Yeah. Man, weird path. I'm sure a lot of the guys that have been doing this for a long time get these kind of questions around, well, how do you get into this business, or how do you get your foot in the door? It's like, man, I don't. These days, you go to UC Davis or you go to Scotland, or you go study somewhere and get a legit paper that tells people what you're doing. But we got started in 2008, and I think we're a little bit disruptors and kind of have authority issues at heart anyway. So just a lot of DIY culture that kind of continues to this day. A lot of experimenting, a lot of willingness to make mistakes. I got into homebrewing right after college, so 99. Buddy gave me some homebrewing gear for a wedding present, and got into that pretty heavily. Tried to open breweries a couple times, financing, something that always fell through. And my previous partner here at the Balcones, we both were involved with multiple brewery projects that didn't go down. Lost touch, got back together years later, and me and a friend did open a Texas-focused craft beer bar here in Waco, and but somewhere in the process of getting that going, and what should have felt like finally checking a big box of life dreams, all of a sudden, man, I stumbled into single malt. Had a buddy that had spent some time in Oxford, and me and him ran a bike shop together for a while on the side. And he just couldn't believe that I didn't like single malt, being a beer guy. And so we were at a bar one night and just started plowing through stuff. And I know this is a little backwards, but it was our bag that really was like, oh fuck, this exists. What else is like this?
Right.
Then later in my life being told like, oh, that's what you're supposed to like. You're supposed to land there when you're, on death's door. Then that's supposed to start making sense to you. But like, that was what grabbed me. And this is early 2000s. There wasn't a shit ton of stuff on the shelf, not like now. So we plowed through anything we could find, and just every single malt we could get our hands on. And it just made sense the way we're put together. Like, yeah, the next obvious thing to do is you try your hand at it, right? You start making some yourself. And like a lot of people here, at some point you go, man, maybe we ought to get a permit just to be above board. Right. And then some wives start complaining about the equipment in the garage. And I guess maybe let's look at real estate. And so yeah, we bought a cheap building, but it really felt like just that whole dynamic where you just keep putting one foot forward, and then one day you wake up and kind of realize where you ended up. But that really feels like what happened. I'm not a particularly entrepreneurial guy. I'm not particularly even a career-oriented guy. I like making stuff. I like working with my hands. Got a lot of, I do pottery. I still work on bikes. I do music. This is one of many things. But like, yeah, if you love something, then to dig in and get your hands dirty with that process, that's my primary drive, and always has been. That somehow, that firsthand experience kind of enhances how you understand and appreciate something that you already love. Yeah. And the fact that we do it and sell it is kind of what kind of came a little bit of an afterthought. So yeah, we got going on the cheap. We didn't have any investors or anything. We all maxed out credit cards and put in our life savings, which wasn't much at the time. And started laying down malt and hearing other people's kind of why they ended up there. To me, it was
how do you bump your way through all this? Because there weren't the resources that there are today. If you're starting something today, you can turn to online classes. There's so many other people that are doing it you can turn to. There's probably someone else in your town that has a distillery. So, but you guys are doing it so early on. What's that like?
Yeah, we talked to as many people as we could. We traveled a good bit, just cold calling and emailing people, and there are a bunch of really cool old books that have been reprinted. But man, it's like where like the F and the S look the same, and you're like, I don't know when this was written. I can't understand half this stuff. But you can kind of like stumble your way through it. And I will say, neither one of these guys would probably remember me this day, but two Jims, Jim Rutledge and McEwen, both were extremely kind and forthright. As the community turns out, that wasn't an anomaly. That's kind of how the community works, and that's been my experience ever since. Is if you can stumble into some sort of group tasting or a single barrel buy and just kind of pull someone aside because you have ulterior motives for being there to begin with. They don't know you're there to pick their brain about whiskey questions, but people are pretty forthcoming.
Again, we're a bourbon first group, and Jim Rutledge was the guy that helped you out early on back when he was working at Four Roses.
Yeah, and Brent, who took over for him, is a good friend of mine. Yeah, so I knew him way before he landed that job, and but yeah, just the openness. Even had a long-standing email chain back and forth with Ed Foote, who was the last master distiller at Stitzel Weller before closing. And the ironic thing was, I was trying to pick his brain about all these things, and then he finally said, you know who you should talk to. You got all these weird questions. Well, you should talk to some of these craft guys. They're all barking up all the trees that you're talking about. And I was like, yeah, that's me. So dang it. I really hoped somebody like that was really going to nail it. And he's like, I kind of remembered the mash bills, couldn't remember who they bought barrels from, wasn't sure about the yeast strain, all these things I was really curious about. What's the pH of your backset? These kinds of things. And he was like, you should talk to some of these craft guys. And I was like, well, shit, that's full circle. I guess we'll just keep playing around, But yeah, it was just kind of a stumbling forward, and really, like a lot of people's stories that have already spoken, like it was love first. And I mean, I still chase stuff, this is, we have a whole room. We have a whole whiskey library room. This is just my office one, but like, yeah, we're still seeing when things drop and chasing stuff and trying to track things down and going to auctions and trading trading online with groups and stuff like that's still the overall drive. I still love being awed. I still love cracking something and getting my first pour of something and just being like, oh, Yep.
Yeah.
This still does it.
That's
This still
cool.
checks the box for me.
I like hearing that, because that's the approach that I always take too. I never, because I do podcasts and things like that, but I never want to be like, I'm a journalist. I'm on some sort of equal par or different. I'm in awe when I'm talking to people, because I think it's just an amazing thing. And I always want to come from the perspective of, I'm a bourbon fan, and creating content for bourbon fans is what we do. So yeah.
Cool. And ironically, I think the era of, I'm a bourbon guy, I don't drink scotch, or I'm a scotch guy.
Yeah.
Or these days, who on a call like this doesn't also have like some really nice rum in their closets? Who doesn't have some somebody's got, these people have, there's a lot of Armagnac showing up. Like, we're kind of done. And that's a really nice category, kind of compartmentalization that was very common 15, 20 years ago, that I'm super happy that that's kind of died. We're here for aesthetic reasons. We're here for just beautifully well-made, interesting things, and that can cross. Yeah, it's actually a Boona cask strength back, of course, back in the day when you could walk into any liquor store and pick up some BTAC like it was no big deal.
Right.
But it was a Boona. So first, Highland cask strength stuff that I'd had, that transitioned from that to like Handy back in the day, and then I kind of backdoored into bourbon after Scotch. Thought I wasn't really into it, and kind of came from another weird path back into bourbon. But these days I don't really give a shit, man. You can put something tasty in front of me, let's go. We got good brown spirits, I'm in.
Yeah, that's the way I am too. It's just, at the end of the day, it's comes down to what's inside the glass, and so it's always based on taste for me. So as I get into this bottle shop thing, it's amazing to me how many people be like, well, what's the mash bill? I need to know that I'll taste it. I'm like, taste it, and then you can decide if you like that. You back into that, whether you like it or not. Who cares what the mash bill is? Does it taste good? Yeah,
that's funny. That just feels like the talking points from like 1960, 18,
right?
Like all the differentiation is just going to be our mash bill.
It just keeps coming up though. So I told my business partner Jim, like, I guess we need to work on that and have it out there. If that's what people want, we can't do it everything how we would do things. So we're
and you do have to connect. I mean, they even say the same with the age statement stuff. Like, luckily we've progressed where that conversation's been happening long enough where people understand different aging climates.
Right.
I was really fortunate. The Whiskey Exchange show that happens in London every year.
Yeah.
It's been virtual for a while, but I feel like even the hot climate stuff, which almost everybody, well, maybe not Owen, but the kind of hot climate maturation conversation has progressed so far that they had a panel for it. And so of course I'm doing it from Texas. It was like, I can remember, it was like 2 a.m, but they've got guys from Goa, they've got, India, Taiwan, us, who else was on there? But it was cool. Like someone figured out, this is enough of a global theme with World Single Malt that we should have a chat about this and get people and get the different takes on how that affects things, and then sit there and watch people who got their samples, going from our, I don't think it was lineage. I think it was our classic, which is all virgin oak, but watching people drinking that next to Cavalan and going, oh, wow, there's like recurring threads here. Like, yes, that's what we've been trying to say
right
individually for a decade. And now it's like, okay, this is kind of coalescing, and it's nice to see that kind of get its day. And of course, Cavalan's success hasn't hurt that conversation. Like 4, 5, 6 years, don't care. Nobody cares anymore. Right. Just give it to me tasty,
So as we're looking through some nosing notes there, and they're great. Crispy grapes, green, similar to green grapes, cranberry, banana pie, a little dusty, which can be good. You sometimes like a little dusty funk on there, right? Banana pudding, Nilla wafers, that's a good combo. White peach tea, raw sugar cookie dough, pineapple. Another one says yes to the pineapple. Noses like a brandy, pineapple soaked in rum. Man, these are fantastic. Banana split in a glass, bananas, chocolate, walnuts. Yeah. Brandy, good port. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the product a little bit as I was going through those closing notes there.
This isn't super unique to us. I think everybody doing single malt that isn't doing it, in either Scotland, Ireland, or these days I'd maybe even throw Japan in there, is kind of, on new territory. So globally, we're all kind of trying to figure out some of the same things. So for us, we wanted to have some intentional touch points of how to create some conversation between the two traditions to do this in the US. What about American distilling and American whiskey tradition is going to come to the table? And then what about for me at least, the whiskeys that made me even give a shit about whiskey to begin with, like where my whole journey starts. So our original single malt that we led with, and for years the only one we had, was 100% Golden Promise, Scottish barley, Highland barley. It's 4 size pot stills. This is double pot distillation. But I mean, so, up until we hit barrel, this is just super traditional, straightforward approach to Scotch. For people not familiar with Golden Promise, it's kind of fallen on the wayside for higher efficiency, like higher yielding grain, is more alcohol per pound. Nobody walked away from things like Golden Promise or Maris Otter because they weren't tasty. There's just other varieties that you can get more alcohol for your money. So even to go back to some of the single malts, Scottish and Irish both, from mid 60s, mid 80s, that were being laid down with this as the primary grain. Especially, we all live in an era of bourbon guys, especially, where everyone's like, oh, it's not like it used to be. Well, these are some of the reasons. And to be small enough to be like, that loss of efficiency, like maybe that could cost, fill in the blank, Diageo, whoever, that could cost them billions of dollars if they were to go back to this. A year for us, it's like, I can eat 10 grand or something, like for to have better, to have more
economies
flavorful.
of scale work to your favor.
Sure. Yeah, you're a little more nimble, and you can make flavor decisions that aren't really as impactful on the bottom line. But then we were doing 100% virgin oak. So that was our way of, really till we hit barrel, this couldn't be more traditional. And then we're going to throw this new oak, and the end result being this thing that can initiate conversation between, at the time, a much more common statement of like, oh, I don't drink. And how fun it was to see in those early years people coming by the table and, oh, I'm a bourbon guy, I'll probably like your corn whiskey. Of course, the corn whiskey is more similar to like a single grain, or like a space side. And so then the single malts go in virgin oak, and they're like, oh, I like the single malt better. Like, well, yeah, you're a bourbon guy. You like virgin oak. So that was what we did for a long time. Lineage is one step further down that direction. And what made it possible was in about 2013, 2014, beginning to work with Texas A&M on malting grade barley for Texas, which was not a thing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Years and years of trials. We're still in them. I think we've laid down 11 different grains, and every year we kind of pick a couple varieties that really did well, both flavor wise and yield worked out, and then we'll plant those and a few new. So we're barely scratching the surface. When I hear about the stuff the Waterford guys are doing, it kind of reminds me of like the nightmare, the spreadsheet with all of the varieties between who farmed it, who malted it, how they malted it, was it drum or floor, the grain variety. It's just a sprawling thing that I'll be retiring, and somebody who comes behind me can like finally dial it in and figure out what's the right stuff to be planting and where, and malted by who and how. For now, I'm just having a good time exploring this whole world of it. But once we had malting grade Texas barley, we were laying it down, buying everything we could, and we just didn't really have a plan for what to do with it. And I can't remember if it was me, or even it may have been Gabe, as my blending partner and our warehouse manager. But we kind of had this idea of continuing that conversation between the traditions and just taking it one step further. So what we do for Lineage is we lay down Golden Promise, both in virgin and in refill. These days, it's mostly our own refill, ex-rye, ex-corn whiskey, or ex-bourbon casks. Then we lay down Texas barley, also almost 50-50 in virgin oak and in used casks. And then when it comes blending time, all of that kind of comes out on the table, which also means blend by blend, what's carrying your fruit or your kind of hay and farmy notes, and wherever you need to find the stuff that makes the profile, you find it. So the mash bill, if you will, or the barrel bill, isn't really that big a deal to us. We're trying to go for a specific profile. So it has a lot more virgin than a lot of what's been on the table so far. It usually hovers around 30% of what ends up in the final blend is virgin oak, and the rest is mostly refill. But yeah, just trying to see how those two grains play together. Their fruit is different, their spices are different. How they carry oak and kind of classic vanilla and caramel notes is different. And similar to the Blue Peak, I think they both came out at a similar time. We were also getting really tired of the feedback constantly of if this is already a category that's hard for people to get their head around and get them to dip their toe into and convince them to like, just give some American single malts a shot. I think you'll be surprised at what's out there. What can we do to make that as easy as possible? And obviously a lot of our stuff's over 100 proof. It's like, okay, cool. Well, let's play around with a lighter profile, a more approachable and familiar profile. Let's drop price, which means, of course, for this product, we don't make nearly the margin on this expression that we do on other stuff, but that wasn't the point. The point was, you hear all the time out in the field, in the market, at tastings, what's keeping people away from this. And it was like, fine, let's make something that just like literally goes by and checks every one of those boxes.
Right.
Let's make this as easy as possible. So then you go, oh, and hopefully that makes you start hitting the shelf and buying up all the American single malt you can. Because I think once you do that, you're going to be amazed. So, and we're not the only person. I mean, it's, Westland's been working in a similar direction. I think everyone kind of had this realization, like we gotta kind of start meeting some people where we're at. I think there's a little cockiness and like artists do this, and aesthetic pursuits can lead you down this path. But I think we spent a long time kind of like demanding or expecting that everyone was going to meet us where we were at. And I think there's a relational aspect to what we've been trying to do this whole time that just wasn't landing. And we finally, I think, got a little bit off our high horse and our soapbox. And we're like, all right, where are people coming from? Where are they at? And like, how do we start? What's the one step further along the line that's a conversation that's comfortable to have, and and put something tasty in their hand, and makes it a lot easier to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, cheers on this last one. And if you haven't tried it already, let's talk a little tasting notes here. Just been a night of surprises for sure. Finding the Gateway single malt is quite an adventure.
So yeah, I guess we've been kind of creeping up. So we're up to 94 now.
Mm-hmm.
I never do proof. I think that's another American thing, like not being a proof guy. Like I'm always like, it shouldn't be too hard to multiply something by 2, but it still fucks me up every time. Like looking at the other bottles with the proofs, and I'm like 47.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah, and I think there's a recurring there's density issues, not issue in a bad sense. So I think there's a compression of flavor there's something about American, especially when people are doing pot. You can just cram a lot into the same amount of space that I don't think column would ever give you, and I don't think even some cooler maturation climates always give you.
Right.
Yeah, we're super big on, we love mouthfeel and texture, and apparently mouthfeel is like a dirty word now. Mouth feels like people are putting that in the same camp as like smooth and bold.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Let's keep that. That's good, because it's a great descriptor to talk about what you've got there. Is it does it have an oily viscosity? Is it stick around there? Does it heat up? So yeah, I like it.
Pineapple cream soda milkshake. I would drink. That sounds yummy.
Oily spice, ginger, rich spiciness. Yeah, it's definitely spicy. And that kind of sticks around and kind of just intensifies a little bit just across the palate, really. Mouthfeel equals marzipan. You're on the wrong event, Tim. That was that's a different channel tonight. Beautiful finish, sticks around. Yeah, it does stick with you a long time. And again, sweet and spicy, all kind of mixed together. So yeah, really, really good stuff.
Thanks.
How does water change this? Asked Gary. I would get out some water and test it out.
We'll put some in. I don't know why. Maybe somebody.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the other distillers on here. I've always wondered why malt takes water so well. I mean, I just think objectively, I try to water all kinds of whiskeys, and like malt, you kind of can't screw it up. Like you may overdo it, but it's always like, oh, this makes sense. I can see a little dash in almost any malt, and it always is fine. And then I can try it with other stuff that just ruins it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Very cool.
If there's any science with that, I'm definitely not aware of what that would be.
Right.
Oh, and you unmuted. Do you know?
I couldn't tell you the science, but I do have anecdotal evidence. We'd never done anything under 47 until a few years ago. And when we launched that Blue Peak, we were talking about Jared and I laughed that we launched it at the same time without any coordination, but obviously kind of with the same thought processes.
Yeah.
But we did that at 86, and that was by far the lowest we'd ever done. And I was super worried that it was going to come across as watery.
Right.
But to Jared's point, the added water in bottle, not afterwards, so a little bit different, but it actually came across, and I'm not just bullshitting, it came across as more creamy to me. And I think that's maybe just like an inherent malt quality, like you hear about Highlands cream and all these other cream things that Scotch is always, blah, blah, blah marketing. And I think there's something to it. I couldn't tell you the science behind it, but I'm finding the same things Jared just said in my day-to-day here.
Yeah,
Very
definitely.
cool.
And I think it is especially noticeable when you have like you really lean into again some of those finishing casks like a Pedro Jimenez. You have those heavy nutty walnut flavors. You have those very present, very soft. And speaking of, we just released a limited release that is finished in Pedro Jimenez. And we actually knocked that proof down by 5 points from what we had originally planned it at for that same reason. It just made it so much more floral and much more and blossom so much more. And it makes maybe part of it is ethanol content. You get that bite from a higher ABV that's going to cover up some of those more delicate floral vegetal notes. But again, yeah, no scientific basis, just
It's just always been curious to me.
Yeah.
You can do a splash or a significant chunk of water in a barley based whiskey, and it seems to always mostly be okay. And I've definitely screwed up some other spirits that way.
It's always baffled me. I would agree exactly with Jared that malts go take water and keep taking it. You try it with bourbons and rye, from my perspective, or other whiskeys generally, and it just doesn't have the same differentiator. It's just I wish I had the scientific evidence. Come on, Owen, you've been a heavy walk. Come on, tell us what it is. We need the details.
I knew I'd tell you, or I should just
Yeah,
say
there you
my
go.
secrets to myself.
I don't think
but
anybody really does.
I just drank my way through that year and a half in Scotland, so there was some lost lectures. Let's say that much.
So does that qualify you as a Scotsman now? Because that's all they do.
I could have voted in the referendum if I'd been there like a few months earlier. So, I don't know. You tell me, Colin.
Yeah.
As long as you separate yourself from England, you're better off. That's for sure.
Yeah, there you go.
There's an Englishman.
Yeah. Well, Jared, thanks so much. And now we'd like to open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? I saw one came in. Jason Sauter is wanting to know, are most American single malt producers doing double pot distillation as opposed to column stripping run for oil content? Is that typical how that's done?
I would say so. My experience, I know a few people with some hybrids, and half the time they don't even have the plates engaged.
Right.
Most everybody I know is doing double pot.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's more typical, just to get the flavors that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And as you said, get the oils out.
Oh
yeah. And sorry, go ahead, Owen.
All right, I'll make it quick. Just as a counterpoint, I mean, we do pot, but we were speccing out, what the next distillery expansion might look like, and if a column still might factor into that. And I'm not terribly anti column still, because I think the great example there is Nika Coffee Malt, which is a fucking phenomenal whiskey. So we do double pot. I like pot. I like what it brings to the table, but I'm open to the idea of other stills. And I think what's cool about the work that Jared's done, Colin's done for years, that Mark and I, to a lesser extent, are now being involved. But it's open. The fact is American single malt can do either one, and I think that's super cool and allows it up. It's not what anyone's perception is. It's up to the producer's discretion to make what they want to make, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I always tell people, because we'll have people come through on tours and ask, oh, well, you guys do pot distillation, so you must be 100%, pot distillation. And, over the multiple distilleries I've been at, we've done hybrid, we've done column, we've done pot. It's what you want to achieve. I think, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, I think a lot of it is also, are you doing on grain or off grain? If you're doing on grain, you're getting a lot more of those tannins coming through in the barley. You're getting a punchier, more aggressive American style flavor. If like us, and I think pretty much everyone here, if you're doing it off grain fermentation, off grain distillation, that's going to be a lot lighter. And if you run that through a column, if you're not careful, you're stripping a lot of those congeners out. And so I think it's what do you want to achieve? Do you want heavier, oilier, more potent new mate going into your barrel? Do you want cleaner, more neutral stuff that you're going to pick up more of that barrel content when you're aging?
I think another thing that's super important for kind of any creative endeavor, I don't think we have to just, we don't have to completely ignore market stuff or, data. Obviously that stuff helps guide a little bit and helps you be smart about some of the decisions you make. But I think you can tell sometimes when there's a lack of personal connection to the work that someone's doing. And so I think being open to that, even being open to how you change over time. Like at this stage of my life, you could rewind a couple decades, and I can't remember the last time that I wanted to throw down a 15% barrel aged imperial stout, but I will crush a 6-pack of Pilsners with buddies in the evening. I'll do that every day. So even for me lately, so things change, and things that I used to poo-poo or like just wasn't interested in, now I find totally fascinating. And so I think it would be super fun to throw down some grain whiskey and do some blending. Like that sounds fun to me today. And I would have made fun of myself if I had told myself at 34 that he would have kicked my ass. The old man wants to do blended malt. But there's a lot of great whiskeys that are made that way. And once again, then now I'll come back to flavor. But if you chase kind of like, if you can honestly kind of own where you're at and where your interests are, I think you could you throw some malt through a column and make something really compelling? Like, yeah, if that's driven by like a legitimate, honest aesthetic interest in that, fuck yeah. Like, why would I think you're not going to do that tastefully or carefully or flavor forward? Like, yeah, you can do that. I wouldn't get a column. I wouldn't even know what to do with it. I have no idea how you set it up, how you run it. I'm pretty sure it's really like a transformer.
Right.
So it does all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know.
It's into a car at night and you can drive it home.
Yeah. Or we do a lot of rum too. And I think I've had the same thought. Even, we're still running off bourbons and ryes off a pot. And that does make for a unique proposition in the final product. But man, you want to just knock out a classic weeder profile? You're not going to do that on a pot still. I kind of wish we had a little tiny one just for blending components. So like I could run some through a column just so I can like get closer to like a really classic, like some of the things I look for in a whiskey like that. So yeah, I think it's all form fitting function. And yeah, if you know what you go for, get the equipment that's appropriate for the job. But more importantly, have like a legit, like there's a compelling drive to go down that path. Otherwise, I think the story falls flat. Your communication, your excitement around it, and probably the final product just is going to be a little, anemic if you're not actually excited about doing that. Yeah.
I think Compass Box is a big inspiration for me as a blender. And I think that speaks to someone the people behind it that are working with grain, with column distilled, with pot distilled, and making incredible things at different price points at different purposes. Like their Great King Street is meant for cocktails and uses a higher proportion of column distilled whiskey for that reason. It's just a really cool company, and I'm a big Scotch dork, so I love it. But I think it's, again, just American single malts. We can look at different things to take inspiration from, and that's certainly one that I do.
Yeah. What else you guys want to know? Any questions? You can open up your mic. Feel free. And you can ask an individual distiller or put out a question for the group.
All right. I did want to share, I'm always looking for something that just sucks. That way I don't have to chase it. But tonight, nothing sucks. I mean, and this has been the ongoing thing with the single malts I found. Lenny, I've had your stuff. I've had Iron Root. I've had Boulder. They all have phenomenal single malts. I mean, the flavors and the profiles are wonderful. And I'm just glad that you guys go out and do that. I did have one question, though. Do any of you guys do your own malting? Or do you all buy them from malting houses?
We do. We actually used to when Whiskey Del.
Nice. Yeah. Congrats. Yeah, that's cool. Not many do that. So yeah.
No. When Whiskey Del Vac first started, we actually malted 100% of all of the malt we used, both the mesquite smoked and the unsmoked. As we grew, we realized pretty quickly that wasn't feasible. So we do source all of our unsmoked two-row barley malt from the Pacific Northwest. But for our mesquited malt that we utilize in our Dorado and some of our heavier smoke products, we do actually receive two-row barley seed that is grown in southeast Colorado. We then do the malting and smoking of that 100% in-house.
Nice.
See, this is something I love about getting on these calls. I didn't know that about Del Vac. It's fascinating. And I know, the Colorado guys trying to use Colorado malt, and Jared's trying to use, Texas malt when he can. And I didn't know you guys malted malt. That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
We're trying to get malting going here in New Mexico, but if those of you who've been here know, there's not a lot of water to start growing barley.
Right.
But as soon as we do, we've got to convince those guys to build a malting house. Then we can say New Mexico grain. That really would be a first.
Yeah, and that's a similar issue we face here in Arizona.
Yeah,
too.
Arizona's the same. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because we would love to. There is a malt house here in Arizona called Sinagua that they have really been investing a lot of time and money into finding a sustainable malt source, a barley source. They grow their own, and it's still a very small operation, but yeah, ways you can lean into that, for better or worse, terroir of where you're coming from. And so, yeah, so that was one of the things that, really appealed to me about Whiskey Del Bach was this idea of, okay, let's have our hands in as much as we can so we can control as many of these variables. So it's a unique malting system too. It was designed by Stephen. People ask, is it floor malting? Is it how do you malt? And I say it's this very unique. I've never seen it before, but it works. We put it in and we get high quality mesquited malt out.
Nice. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. I don't know if you go by Daniel or Bear. You got Bear in there. So
it's Bear. Yeah, just
Bear.
go by Bear.
It's such a funny thing since we were all kind of self-taught, just like reading and fumbling. I was never interested in being distracted by another aspect of production that I also hold in really high regard. Like cooperage is the same. It's like, well, shit, you could go spend a whole lifetime getting good at malting, his whole lifetime getting good at being a cooper. I'd rather buy from people that have been doing that a long time. And I can keep focusing on this other stuff that is still like, there's so many things yet to try. In general, as a human, I like to kind of like go a little bit shallow and wide and have like, I'm not really great at anything, but I can do a whole bunch of stuff. But this specific process has been so fascinating. Like, man, fermentation parameters and blending stuff to me was still like, oh, if I do that, that's going to take away from this other area that I still have so many questions. And I don't really want to get distracted from that. And, some people know about Balcones history. We dabble with still making and stuff. And in hindsight, like some of that ended up being a little bit of a distraction. It was a sidebar when we could have been doing other things just to end up with something that mostly worked and was like, okay. And took a lot of time and a lot of money and busted a bunch of knuckles getting built when we could have just been getting whiskey made, but you live and learn, you dabble, you DIY, and you kind of fiddle with stuff just to go, well, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. But
just because Lenny and Colin and I have done a few of these, we've kind of found a few of our talking points. Actually, first of all, Lenny, I think single malt panel, none of these suck, should maybe be your next sticker. Yeah. I think that probably does it all right. But no, normally when we do these in Colorado, and Colin's essentially our honorary
thank you
Colorado who comes up, but we have Ryan Negley normally from Boulder Spirits, and one thing that I think super cool and also allowed in the proposed single malt regulations, so the founder of Boulder Spirits or Vapor Distillery, kind of same idea as Hamilton, is that they import all their barley from Scotland because their founder is Scottish. And I think that's a cool thing that is completely allowable and still speaks to his roots and has a compelling story behind it. And especially this, we did one a few weeks ago with 5280 Whiskey Society, and Lenny sent his distiller who was sitting there right next to us. And it was really cool trying Lenny's port finished one right next to Boulder Spirits sherry finished one, because on paper those aren't super different from each other, but you try Boulder Spirits 100% Scottish barley imported sherry finish, and it is very Scotch like, and I think that's fine. That's what he wants to do, and that's awesome. And it's still Colorado influenced with new oak in our climate. And then you have Lenny's that was like this chocolate bomb port one that spoke to Lenny's brewer's roots, and like having those tasted right next to each other was so cool to me, because it just showed Lenny using like his brewers. And sorry, Lenny, if I'm speaking for you, you can tell me to fuck off.
Hey, go for it. Thank you.
Like being able to speak to Lenny's background in brewing right next to being able to speak to Boulder's background, or Boulder's founder's Scottish heritage, is what it's all about to me. And for us to be able to do that in a tasting right next to each other was so cool to me.
Very cool. Last question. Does anybody have a final question for our group? Okay, I see Melanie Robinson. Melanie Robinson got it.
I don't really have a question. I just have a statement. I want to thank all four distillers and Lenny. This has really been very expanding for the palate. These are all delicious. And just a side note, they're all great with peanut M&Ms.
Peanut M&Ms. Peanut M&Ms is a great pairing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll have to get some of those for our next tasting at the distillery.
Yeah. Tony, were you going to say something there? That didn't come as a question. So
Nope, I was just agreeing.
okay, just agree. Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear it. A round of applause for Owen, Colin, Mark, and Jared. Great job, guys. You really
And
brought it,
Lenny.
of course. We really appreciate it out. And of course, thanks to Lenny for putting all this together. What a great job by Mr. Lenny. Hey, Lenny, how about this, man? Great stuff, brother. Very cool.
You know, I gotta say though, it was kind of self-serving for me. Like it was a fun opportunity, Steve, when you said like, you know, what do you think about picking some of your favorites? That's a tough one. And
Right.
you know, we between this week and next week, we've got some solid Colorado representation. It's very hard not to just pick only friends in Colorado.
Right.
But there's so many out here that I've either been curious about or like, you know, a super geeked out about or take inspiration from. You know, Balcones has been one forever. Jared, I don't think we've ever been in the same room together, but man, I've got pretty much everything you guys make in my cabinet.
Thanks, man.
I don't think I would have ever started without Stranahan's. I mean, there's just so much inspiration ongoing here. And
You've created pressure for yourself for next week now, though, because you started out so great here. Did you do too much on your first event here? Maybe we'll see. We'll see. It's gonna be tough to top, man.
Good lead in.
Yeah, for sure. All right, with that, we'll say goodbye to our audience here that's watching this on YouTube. I'll stick around if you want to talk whiskey, anything like that. We do like to let our guests go, though they can stick around and hang out with us and just talk and chat if they want. But we do like to stick to our 90-minute commitment, and that's where we're at right now. So we'll say goodbye. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Bye.